This is the Relentless Endeavor Let's Talk podcast to get the generations talking. I'm Sherry Thompson, Executive Director of Relentless Endeavor, and I represent the Boomer and Gen X generations. With me is Peter Thompson, representing millennials. Yes, there is a family connection, and we do hope that this podcast not only helps other families with multiple generations have important conversations, but really anywhere else where there's multiple generations that need to interact. Our topic today is mentorship. Now, we're going to discuss mentorship both in the workplace and in matters of faith. And yes, for a committed Christian, those should have some serious overlap. But for those listening who might not be, mentorship is still a huge benefit. So let's start in the workplace. I'm just going to give a little bit of information to begin with. I did some research, and I found that mentoring in the business workplace is really on the uptick. In fact, 98% of Fortune 500 companies now visibly provide mentoring programs to their employees. And that has led to some significant financial advantages for these companies. The median profits for those with mentoring programs are twice those of companies without mentoring, which is huge. Now, I've done a lot of research with a website called MentorClick, and that's where all of my stats are coming from tonight. And we want listeners to see some of the things that might happen in a workplace and why mentorship is helpful. And then we're going to get to personal mentorship and faith mentorship. So we're going to backtrack just a little bit. We did a podcast on jobs, and we did not talk about this, so we're going to hit it just a little bit tonight. And that's this idea of quiet quitting. So quiet quitting has become a real problem for a lot of businesses. It's basically when you have an employee that's really burned out, and they stick around working just the minimum of what needs to be done instead of working on a growth mindset to pursue other interesting projects and advance themselves. They're not part of the team. They're just going to work, getting the job done, and going home. Bare minimum. And this happens for a variety of reasons. Some of them feel like there is nowhere to advance. There's nowhere to go, so why even try? Some of them don't have connection with colleagues. They either work in a cubby all day long and they don't talk to anybody else, or they work remotely and they don't interact with other people. Some of them are just really honestly burned out by the amount of work on their plate that never seems to go away. And if they have gotten any kind of a raise in the last several years, inflation has completely made it really not matter. And many of them haven't gotten a raise in the last several years. So their salary is certainly not keeping up with the cost of living increase. Now, quiet quitting is not just bad for the companies, which it is, and we're going to talk about that. It's bad for the person themselves, because if they're willing to live that way in their workplace, 8 to 10 hours a day, that idea of living to the minimum is going to just become a habit in their everyday lives and in their relationships. So for any employers listening, here's some interesting information. According to Gallup, only 32% of employees were actively engaged in early 2022. So this is recent information. 17% were actively disengaged. So if 17 out of every 100 employees is like actively disengaged, they are quiet quitting, that can cost a company up to over $100,000 a year if they have 100 employees. That's a lot. And if you have 1,000 employees, that can get into the millions. That's just huge for companies and most probably can't afford that. To have employees that are working for them, they're paying for their salary, they're paying for the benefits, and they're not getting what they're paying for. So where does mentorship come in? Well, we're going to talk about that. And before we do, though, Peter, I want us to talk about what quiet quitting looks like from your perspective. I'm not in the workplace. I have been, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute because I do have an example of quiet quitting. But I want to know, you work for a company, you go out of your home to work. Can you tell me if you see this idea of employees being disengaged? Don't tell us where you work. Do you see quiet quitting in the place where you work, or do you know, as you talk to your peers, that is a thing going on? And what does that look like on a practical level? Like in the office, what would that look like?
Yeah, definitely see quiet quitting, and it cost two of my coworkers their jobs.
Oh,
Yeah, they were
yikes.
involved in layoffs that happened recently. As far as, oh God, yeah, I do see it. What does it look like on a practical level? Gosh, so many things. Using two of my coworkers as an example, one of them, he wasn't being given a bunch of work. He got moved to a slightly different role. He wasn't being given as much work as they thought would exist in that role, and rather than like go pursue it, additional work, he just kind of sat there with it and stretched the work out. So then his productivity looked like really low compared to everyone else, even though he'd been moved into that role. But then they were unwilling to move. I kind of get it though, because they were also unwilling to move him back out of that role. So when he did start eventually asking for more stuff, he was working more than other people. Like he was on my team, and he got moved to like his own little mini team that was kind of a branch, and he had less to do, but they weren't going to let him get rid of that stuff. He was just eventually given all of the same stuff that he had before, his own additional work on his mini team, and then no pay raise in all of it. So
There you go.
yeah. And then another coworker, he was just kind of he wasn't argumentative. He just tried to negotiate everything. So, hey, can you stay late? Yeah. Can I come in late tomorrow then? Things like that. Hey, can you do this? Yeah. Can I put this down then? And not that that's bad, because people only have so much bandwidth. I get that. But it very much came across like transactional, not like, hey, I'm at my bandwidth. It's, hey, I'm going out of my way to do this for you, so you go out of your way to do something for me. It was kind of negotiation, but not from a place of equality, because he was having these conversations with his manager.
Gotcha.
So I think, quiet quitting is definitely a thing. I think part of quiet quitting is, like you said, a lack of engagement, a lack of clarity on where you can go within the company. Like you mentioned, people don't, if you want to continue in the company, you're not going to quiet quit, So
Sure.
I would say on a practical level, if there's a lack of clarity, or you're literally told this is where you're going to stay, there's no reason to continue any further. You know what I mean? And I think that's where mentorship can bridge that gap and say, these are some options for advancing.
Yeah, I agree. I think for my generation, the term quiet quitting wasn't around, but there's always been people who've worked at the bare minimum. I worked one time when I was a teacher, and we had, our contract day was this hour to this hour. When we had staff meetings, it was an extra hour. So by 4:30 on Tuesdays, that's when our contract hour was up. And I had a colleague that would just stand up in the middle of staff meeting and say, "My hour's over, I'm out," and he would just leave. And he never stayed past. I think our contract time was, say 8 o'clock to 3:30. School was out at 3:10. We had to stay till 3:30, and at 3:30 he was pulling out of the parking lot. It didn't matter if his room was a mess. It didn't matter if a teacher wanted to talk or if there was a parent there. His contract was over and he was done. So some of that looked like just that's a bare minimum. And I think it looks like maybe coming in late, leaving early, sneaking out the door, taking a long lunch. And my example, I hadn't realized this, but I actually did quietly quit a job. I had been placed in a leadership role, and when my superior left, I got her job. But then, due to budget and other business circumstances, when I was put in her role, I still didn't get her compensation or her benefits. And I was willing to go along with that because I was also allowed to believe that I could put my name in for that job. So I thought, great, I'll just work and prove that I could do this job, which I did for about a year. And then I was called in and I was told that I was no longer being considered for the job because I didn't have the education that the company wanted for that role, even though I've been doing that role for a year without that education. So, after that, I really did have a change of heart and actually a change of work ethic. And I wish I could say that I had worked as hard as ever, but I know that I didn't. And I continued to do the job well, but I didn't start any new programs or seek to develop myself that. And I look back now and I realized that I had really quit before I actually did resign, which I eventually did do because they found someone to replace me, and wanted to put me back in my junior role. And I was like, no, not willing to. I'm not willing to take a step back. So I do know how it feels to work at a minimum, and some of that frustration that comes from underappreciation and undercompensation. But I think if I had had a mentor that could step in and say, okay, let's talk this through, it might have made a huge difference. So let's look at some ways that mentors can help in the workplace. One way is mentors.
I do want to point something out real quick.
Yeah, sure.
As you were talking about, your former coworker that was like leaving at 3:30 on the dot, stuff like that. That's not to say that you can't have boundaries with your job. Absolutely. We've talked about boundaries a little bit. It's not either quiet quitting, doing the bare minimum, or letting your employer run roughshod over you. It's not one or the other. There is a middle ground in between there that can be found, where you're doing work, you're doing your contracted work, for lack of a better term, and then also going beyond in certain areas. But to know which areas I think you need a mentor. I don't think just kind of shotgunning and trying to do everything at work is a good thing. I don't think that doing the bare minimum is a good thing either necessarily. Just because, like you said, it bleeds over into other areas of your life. It causes issues with, potentially causes issues with teammates, stuff like that. So there is a middle ground. And I don't want people to hear like quiet quitting is all one-sided.
I agree.
So there is an in-between between employers burning the employees out without care for them and employees doing the bare minimum. And I think the bridge between those two is actually mentorship.
I would totally agree. Agree. Yeah. Mentors can totally help with boundary setting because they've been in the same situation. Mm-hmm. They can also
help. If they're causing issues with boundaries, they're not a good mentor.
Well, this is true. You do have to have a good mentor. So a good mentor will be able to help employees learn how to not dwell on their mistakes. Every employee makes a mistake, especially if you're just starting out in a field. You're going to make mistakes, and sometimes it can really bring somebody down. But if you have a mentor saying, I did the same thing when I started out, or yes, I had that, I did that same thing and I learned, this is what I learned from it. You're going to learn from it too. You're going to go on. So just, helping someone kind of get over the hump of making mistakes. And they can help when employees are a little discouraged, when they do feel undervalued. Even just having one other person see the effort that you're putting in, acknowledge the effort that you're putting in, can make a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And then I love also that mentors can actually help employees to set goals and to dream about where they might like to go and who they might like to be in this business or in their vocation further down the road. Who do you want to be in 5 years? Who do you want to be in 10 years? Is this mm-hmm. a job you want to have in 10 years? If mm-hmm. so, what role would you like to have in this company? They can be really good vision casters because a lot of times people don't know what the possibilities are. Mm-hmm. But a mentor who's been in that field longer knows. They're down the road a little bit further. So let me ask you to respond to those roles, Peter. And do you think that if there was someone in your business who could do those three things, help you not dwell on mistakes, set goals and dream about where you might like to go, and help when you're emotionally discouraged, do you think that you and your peers would value someone like that in your workplace?
Yeah, and to an extent we have that. My team, awesome. we have a manager, and we meet each person on my team meets with my manager every other week, I think, at this point, twice a month kind of thing. We go over, our measurable stats, talk about issues. If we have an idea, we pitch it there. And we do have, it's funny, we do have required, we have annual goals that we have to set, like as a company. We're kind of given, here's where we want to go as a company, figure out where within those goals as an organization your work can fit. So I set some goals at the beginning of the year. It's one of them is just completely shot at this point because they canceled that product. So my helping on that product is just done. But we can't get rid of it because it's part of the goals, and it has to be graded every 6 months. But then we also have like other things that are less measurable, which is kind of hard. I think, having a vision for who you want to be is just as important as like the measurable stuff, because if your role doesn't have anything very measurable, or the things that you're measured on are outside of your control, that makes it difficult, because it's like, oh, your numbers are down. Okay, my numbers are down because there's less to do in that area. Like, hey, you didn't do anything for that product this month. Well, yeah, they canceled it last month. So let's go ahead and just not factor that in, that kind of a thing. Yeah. So I would say having things that you can measure is good, but also having things that you can't directly measure is also good. But at least you can get a sense of like, am I better or worse than I was the last time we talked? And I think that's
you have that.
Huh?
So would you say your manager is a type of mentor in your workplace?
No, I would say he's good at checkpoints. What are your stats? What is this? What is that? But there's no good example of where we can go. There's no good explanation. And it's not that he's not giving it to us. There just flat out isn't one on my team. You have to completely change specialties or move into a different role within my organization that is completely different, and actually experienced massive layoffs not too long ago. So it's like, I don't really think those roles are there right now to move into. So that's part of the problem. And I want to make that a point. Mentorship is good in a professional setting, but there's only so much it can do. You have to make sure you're attached to a company that is doing well. And I think based on what I've seen, the companies that implement a formalized mentorship process within their organization are the ones that are actually growing. It's the companies that don't have a formal one that are typically struggling. And I don't know if that's correlation or causation, but it's something to note that, if your company doesn't have any sort of like check-ins with your manager, you're not going to get a raise. There's no way. Like if it's completely discretionary up to the budget committee is going to say, well, no, they worked for this amount of money last year. They'll do it again this year. We have no metric to measure them on. So a mentor, there's two aspects to that professional mentorship. Like I said, there's the measurable and there's the unmeasurable. And I think you need both. And I think you should talk about both. And I've talked about some of the unmeasurable stuff with my manager. And then we had layoffs, and now there's no time to actually deal with the unmeasurable stuff. Because we got cut by 30%, I think, my team. Oh, wow. So yeah, kind of a big deal.
And that's exactly what you said, is just what I said at the beginning of this podcast, that the companies that have an active, visible mentorship program are seeing, twice the median profits in their companies. Mm-hmm. They're getting more work out of their employees. They're getting more quality work out of their employees due to mentorship. Okay, so let's take this kind of step back just a little bit out of just the work role, and look at a mentorship, a mentor that might come alongside you, not specifically attached to your place of employment, but in your life. So we know that as growing people, it's always good to have a mentor. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you had somebody who was in the field of business that you are in, that did not work with your company, but was able to talk to you about your business, ask you questions, give you that encouragement, help you set goals, think about, talk about what's going on in your business, but you could be honest with them because they're not really attached to your business. Would that kind of mentor be helpful to you? Would that make you a better employee if you had a mentor that was outside your business, but someone who understood the financial business that you're in?
I think so. I think that would be beneficial for a lot of people. I think, mentors, one of the keys to there's two main keys to a good mentor. Someone who is both willing to help you and able to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And just because somebody is willing to help you doesn't mean they can.
Oh, absolutely.
Every piece of unsolicited advice on the internet is somebody willing to help you, but it doesn't necessarily mean they can help you. And then just because somebody can help you doesn't necessarily mean they're willing to. And that might not even be a negative, I want to hold you down kind of thing. It can be as simple as, I don't have time in my schedule. Like, if you're going to take time out of my schedule, I need to be compensated for that. And, in the church, a lot of the time that's buy me a cup of coffee, we'll have an hour-long conversation kind of thing. But you have to have both of those aspects. And I think that's why a lot of people get a mentor at work, or they end up hiring somebody to be their mentor, which gets into the able to as much as the willing to. Because if I hire somebody who specializes in real estate to help me, I'm not in real estate. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So you have to have both willing and able to help. And then
that makes sense.
So having somebody fit those roles that exists outside of your company it's a difficult spot. It's a difficult thing to find. So while it can definitely be helpful, it's not exactly easy to find. It's not, people are not knocking on my door offering to help me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because, and we're going to talk about this at the end of the podcast. I will bring it up again. But one of the reasons we're talking about mentorship is because Relentless Endeavor has a whole area of ministry that deals strictly with mentorship because we believe in it so much. What do you know? And obviously, and we are actually matching people up with mentors based on vocation, because that's what research is showing is effective. But also with this idea of not just mentoring them in that business, but in life. And I want us to step into the faith side of things here for the remainder of our podcast, because we have this whole thing where, yes, there's quiet quitting and there's frustrations at work. And there's this, situation where, a lot of workplaces are really getting difficult. And then we have scripture, and we have a way that we as Christians are supposed to be living, not just for the worldly things, but for spiritual things and for our character and for the way our life is supposed to glorify God. And so then these things come into tension. And I thought of two verses as I was planning this. And one is Colossians 3:17, which I always used in my classroom. And it just says, whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So basically, whatever we do at work or not, actions and words should be a way of showing that our life is thankful to God, giving praise to God. Well, that's a really high mandate. Quiet quitting would not fit that mandate. And Galatians 6:9, which says, let us now not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. And so this idea that, we don't just stop being good and doing good in our lives and in our work just because it's getting inconvenient or we're underappreciated. Because our doing good is not necessarily about our job. It's about our character. It's about who we are as people, not just who we are when we walk in the door of an office. And then, when we look at lots of examples of mentorship in Scripture, we see that. We see in the Old Testament, Naomi was mentoring Ruth. Elijah mentored mentored Elisha.
Mm-hmm.
In the New Testament, Paul mentored Timothy and Titus, and actually Barnabas mentored Paul at the beginning of his ministry because he
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what he was doing. And then, of course, Jesus mentored the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
They could go on and then mentor other people.
And Jesus was
So
also running off all the time and praying and getting
yes, he was.
guidance from the Father. Gee,
Absolutely. Absolutely. These
it's like it
mentees,
never
these
stops.
12 mentees you've given me. That's exactly right. But, mentors can really help those who are following Christ keep their faith and their work lives connected. A lot of times it's really easy to say, okay, that's who I am at work, but I'm going to be this great person in church and in my family and with my girlfriend and in my neighborhood and on my team. And then I'm going to be this other person at work. And a good mentor can help someone see that we can't disconnect who we are at work from who we are everywhere else. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work that way for anybody. They just don't know it. But it certainly can't work that way, shouldn't work that way for a Christian who's really trying to follow God, because our lives are not separated into secular and sacred. It's all sacred because it all belongs to God.
Mm-hmm.
So our work life does belong to God. And a mentor can help someone see that piece. So, Peter, I know I asked you if you have a work mentor, but do you have a life mentor? Do you have someone outside of your life that actually is mentoring you in some way?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple, and I would say I can definitely go to them with anything. It's super easy to just get bogged down in the everyday life and not reach out necessarily. So when you've got your day-to-day concerns, it's really easy to not reach out and say, oh, I'll get to that tomorrow. I'll get to that later. I'll ask them about that at some point, and then suddenly, boom, you got to make a decision right there, and you haven't talked to them, and you just kind of go for it. So I would say that having access to a mentor is one thing, but making sure you utilize that mentor is different. And I have just been so busy in life lately. I feel like I've been, trying not to drown in a lot of areas, and it's been, hard to, reach out to them. So that's definitely an area of improvement, but I know I do have access to several people that I could reach out to. I just haven't lately. And these are, in particular, these are men in my life who are several years older than me, but they've also been mentored for longer than me. So they have not just their perspective on things, they have the perspective of people who are mentoring them, who have been mentored. So it's kind of like a discipleship tree. So I'm not just being mentored by somebody who's 8 to 10 years older than me. I'm being mentored, passively, for lack of a better term, by somebody in their 60s who mentors them, who's also being mentored by somebody in their 70s. So I'm getting the perspective filtered through multiple lenses. I'm getting, the long-term thinking of a 70-year-old. I'm getting the actually plan for your future from a 60-year-old. I'm getting the here's how to handle that immediate work situation from a 40-year-old. I'm getting multiple of those perspectives passed down to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the important things that a lot of the paid for mentors, for lack of a better term, don't necessarily have. They operate from a place of principle, not necessarily from a place of perspective. And I think the best mentors have both. If somebody said, hey, you want an hour-long call with Warren Buffett on stocks? Yeah, I do, because he has an incredible perspective and principle. But if somebody said, hey, you want an hour-long call with a stockbroker that just landed a job on Wall Street? I mean, I'm not going to turn it down necessarily, but I'm certainly not going to pay for it by any means, because he just got there. He's operating from a place of principle, not necessarily from a place of perspective.
That makes sense.
Give me his book list. I'll read that myself, and I don't need to talk to him. You know what I mean? Because that's all he's going to know anyway. So I think having the principles and perspective
Yeah, no, that's good.
is important in a mentor.
Yeah, that's good. I actually have a mentor. She's an older woman who loves God. She loves reading. She loves writing and all things grammar. So we get along really well. And I asked, since I had a mentorship program, I thought I should probably have a mentor myself. And I meet with her probably every 4 to 6 weeks. We just get together for a cup of coffee and catch up on life and what's happening and pray for each other. And actually, my husband and I, Rock, we that as a couple, my mentor and her husband mentor my husband and I, because and we asked them to do that actually because we had some very close friends get a divorce suddenly, and it really kind of shook us up. We thought, oh my gosh, if that could happen to them, what's to keep that from happening to us if we don't have some safeguards in our life? And so we asked this couple if we could just spend some time with them. We go out to lunch or dinner or breakfast, whatever. And we just invited them to watch our lives, to watch how we talk to each other, how we treat each other, to ask us any hard questions and to hold us accountable. If they see something that looks like a red flag to them, they've been married much longer than we have. We invited them to call us out and to ask us, what's going on, because they might be able to see things that we cannot see. And so, I wish I had a mentor for the job that I'm in, because I don't. I read about other women who are leaders in ministry, and I let them mentor me through books and podcasts, which is also a good way to get some mentorship. It's not the best, but it is valuable. But I do wish that I had a woman leader in ministry that I could meet with personally, but I just don't know any of those women around me. And the ones that I do know of are like really high profile. And it's not like I can just email them and say, hey, Lisa Turkhurst, will you hang out with me once in a while? But I do wish that I had that kind of mentor in my life, because it can be very lonely, not really having somebody who can speak into what you're doing and give you advice and encourage you and help you with some pitfalls that you don't even know you're headed for. But I am going to keep looking for that for myself. What about you mentoring someone, Peter? Have you ever thought about being a mentor yourself? Is that something you would consider in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I've definitely thought about it, and I'm working to put myself in a position where I can do that. I would say there's to some extent, there's less formal mentorship setups in my life. I have people that come to me for specific things and ask questions, whether it's, I've my brother-in-law, he knows that I have a head for business and also a head for technology. So when he was working on figuring out what direction to go for, like whether to buy some certain products to work on his Etsy store and stuff, he asked me, hey, what do you think about this or this? And I was able to break it down and say, here's what you need to know about these, 2-3 items, whatever. I'm not going to tell you what to buy because, frankly, I can't tell you what direction you want your business to go in. So here's some business things that you need to figure out. And once you have that answer, you'll be able to figure out, okay, based on this, based on the information I have about these items and the information I have about my business, I can find the crossover point and buy the thing that I need to. So I would say I have situations like that where it's not necessarily a formal, here's the exact thing that needs to happen. And it's not like a consistent thing, but I do have certain times where people will come and say, hey, what do we do? What should I do about this? What should I do about that? So I have instances of mentorship, but not like consistent. I'm not consistently in a Paul situation with the Timothy.
Right. But you would consider doing that in the future at some point.
Absolutely.
If you were going to mentor someone, it would probably be someone in their 20s. So you're looking at a college student. So,
oh man, I feel old.
that might be something you want to wait a little bit.
I actually had that moment just the other day where I went, how old am I? Oh no. Oh no. I couldn't do the math real quick. So I literally was like, I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, and I stopped brushing my teeth, and I yelled, I have a Google Home device, and I yelled, "Hey Google, if I was born on my birthday, how old am I?" And she just rattled off, "This is your age." And I was like, oh wow, I used to think people were insane for forgetting how old they were, and now so many things have just blurred together the last several years. A lot of post-COVID feels like a surreal reality.
Yes, it
You know what I
does.
mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my gosh, so much is blurred together. Like, what? What? Anyway,
Oh,
just
I
a little
understand.
personal anecdote that I know you will, because I know you've
You can always
experienced that
call
too.
me and ask me. I know exactly how old you are. I forget how old I am, except for this year. I will not forget. This is the big birthday coming up. I will not forget that one.
Oh yeah.
But I do remember how old you are.
Thank you.
So this is a topic that's really important to us at Relentless Endeavor. And like I had mentioned before, we actually have a mentoring, a high focus on mentoring in this ministry. And we do this because research from the Barna Group showed that one of the 5 key factors that can help a young adult stay connected to their faith is what they call vocational discipleship. So we actually developed that into vocational mentorship. And done well, mentorship is discipleship. And since we are all given the commission to go and make disciples, we believe in this really strongly. Mentorship helps those who are older and more experienced actually fulfill Jesus' command. And mentorship helps younger people learn how to grow and stay connected. And it may even be the one thing that introduces somebody to faith in Jesus Christ. So what we do is we vet and we train and support those who choose to be a mentor. And then we connect them with young adults based on areas of vocation or at least vocational interest. For instance, right now I'm in the process of connecting. It actually turned out really great. I've got a young woman who's a nurse, and I'm connecting her with a retired nurse. And then it turns out her husband is a med student, and the retired nurse's husband is about to retire from the medical field. So I've got this great young couple that are basically in the same place that this older couple was about 30 years ago. And so they're going to mentor. The wife's going to mentor the woman, the husband's going to mentor the guy, and as a couple, they're going to be mentored together. And so it's not the exact same field of medicine, but it's medicine. So this older doctor is going to be able to help this med student navigate his way through medical school. And the nurse is going to be able to help the young woman in her nursing job, but then also what it's like to be married to someone in medical school and what it's like to be married to a doctor. So they're going to be able to. So it's that field of interest. And, not every young person knows exactly what they want to do. They just know a general field. So we match a creative with a creative. We would match someone who's more in the science field with someone who's in a science field, that kind of thing. So, and it's been very exciting to see because our mentors are getting to live out that great commission to go and make disciples. And a lot of times they don't know what that means. They don't know how to do that. And so mentorship gives them that opportunity to actually share their faith and be talking about how their faith, what the role that their faith plays in their life, and to help this younger person navigate living a biblical lifestyle in this culture that we live in right now. So, it's mentorship, it's also discipleship. And we're really excited about the results that we're seeing there. And for anybody listening, if you are interested in learning more, if you're interested in being a mentor or having a mentor, you can go to the website, rekc.org, and click on the Get Involved tab, and then click on Mentorship, and you can scroll down. There's a place there that says, I want to have a mentor, and there's a tab that says, I want to be a mentor. So we would love to give you some more information and get you started in your mentorship relationship. We think, Scripture gives us an example of this, and just practical common sense in life gives us a picture that this is a really needed area for everybody. I think everybody needs a mentor. So Peter, thank you so much for your input. I hope that your mentorship relationships bless you. And I really think that you would be a great mentor for someone someday. You have a lot of compassion and wisdom and understanding and a great sense of humor, and that's what every mentor needs to have. So everybody, thanks for listening. Be sure to check out our other podcasts available on Spotify and YouTube, and we'll see you next time on the Relentless Endeavor podcast to get the generations talking.
The views expressed in this podcast are personal opinions and do not reflect those of any organization. The speakers are not licensed therapists, and their insights are based on their own experiences. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to seek qualified professionals for specific guidance. And by accessing this podcast, you agree that the individuals speaking in this podcast are not liable for any outcomes or consequences that may arise as a result.